As a critic, as a writer, an author, I essentially hold a mirror up to you. And the mirror that I hold up, because I come from industry, for 35 years I've been a licensed architect, working on a lot of projects over time as well. So I come to academia from practice. My mirror is a little wider, that I try to take in the 95% that was alluded to a little bit earlier that aren't necessarily at the level of expertise that you are in the technology world. At the same time, while I stretch that mirror, I try not to distort it either with my own agenda. Also as an academic, ethically, I try not to coerce or mince words. It has been my experience that practice has always been ahead of academia, and with the exception perhaps of Cornell Tech, Stevens, and one or two other schools I can think of. I go to practice, so practice-based research is the type of research I do. I basically just talk and look over your shoulders as you're working. By looking at what's happening right now, it's fairly easy when you go through a rigorous methodology like practice-based research to tell what's going to happen in the future, just by looking at literally what's happening now. Taking a step back real quickly, I'd love to be able to tell you that I grew up using Mylar, and I believe this is, if you can make it out, the notes are in Portuguese, but that's actually not the case. I'll go back much further. I started off with Fortran. This was my workstation, and we were expected in the very first project to do a high-rise using those beautiful cards. This is the world over the summers where I worked. This is the world I belonged to at that time. I could think of at least 3 projects where I was laying horizontally over a table while drafting. And so leaving the cocoon of school, it was quite an eye-opening experience to discover that Fortran wasn't being used everywhere, that there was this whole other thing going on. And so 17 years ago, when I returned to, while still practicing, returned to academia, I made it my charge to not let that happen to our students. As the head of the grad program and teaching 4 different classes, all involving one way or another digital technology, I want to make sure that they are, if not up to speed, a little bit ahead of things. So I do mirror in the way that I mirror the industry, mirror you in the books that I write, and also collaborating with others on their books by contributing chapters. In some of the classes I teach 21 different technologies, not training necessarily, but bring them up on a high level enough so that they're able then to start not only mess with them, but then to see which ones talk to each other, can overlap or benefit by having there be others. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this heat map that's been circulating social media the last couple of weeks, representing where design technologists, essentially, more specifically BIM, is in relation to everything else that's discussed in architectural practice and engineering and construction. But I will like to use it just as an excuse because it's kind of ideal if you think about it. So look at BIM and how it's a little bit disconnected, this heat map, from conversations, if you can make it out, like design, theory, and so on and so forth. This is how I got to work today. And this is where we're having this talk on an island, which I think is incredibly prescient, if you think about it, because it's actually an island off of another island. And one of the takeaways or messages of this research is that we are this 1%. You represent the 1% in our industry. It is an island. Someone alluded a little bit earlier today that through events like this, the people in this room, we are speaking to each other. We're speaking to the converted. And what we should be looking for, perhaps, on the heat map are some hot spots that we can attach to and find common language and interest. Otherwise, if you don't do that, it's like rearranging Titanics on a deck chair. So the 1% are the haves, that's you. And I also go around the country and the world speaking with the have-nots. It's closer to 99% who really are not on board with the tools, or if they are, it's just literally the tools, but not really leveraging them further. And beyond the mirror, holding the mirror up, of course, is the lamp, because the mirror wouldn't be enough. It's shining a light on the major issues that many outside this room are dealing with day in, day out. And so I borrowed this model from Abrams' wonderful book on literary criticism, a field that doesn't exist anymore. The mirror and the lamp. If you look at the work, the artist, and the audience, the bottom three words, that's really what we deal with day in, day out. The universe, I find, is missing from so much of our correspondence and sharing of ideas. Jumping a little bit, I want to touch on this idea of everything, because this is something that in the theory of everything has appealed to scientists and physics, and more recently in our own field. I know Andrew and Brian this morning alluded to it with the Mono platform, so I'm not going to dwell on it and spend a ton of time. I shouldn't be surprised, by the way, that teaching at a state school in the Midwest, no less, that we do have students that go on to fame and fortune working in firms with having the abilities that you have, along with more general skills, because I'm reminded by looking at this that Fed Negro, who's the head of design for WeWork, is a graduate of our program, so I shouldn't be completely shocked. But that said, there are firms of everything that are popping up more and more, in part through mergers and acquisitions, and some of them that are actually legitimate, like Cloudera, who merged a little 6-7 weeks ago with Fast Forward, and Federico will be speaking on that in a moment when I'm done. And mergers and acquisitions explains to some extent what's going on in terms of vertical integration within organizations. I am pretty impressed that our students at our university are very interested in running and owning and being leaders in organizations that are vertical. There's not a lot of students that aspire to be sole practitioners or working behind a computer station or architecture firm. So next up are the algorithms, everything. I'll just make short order of this. I guess the biggest criticism you can make of the algorithm, this idea of the algorithm of everything, is this idea that what you end up with is incredibly specific. It is the optimal solution. We talked a little bit a while ago about optimization being a hot topic a few years back. It is optimal, but then on the 14th floor you move that piano and suddenly that ideal optimized truss, you start pining for the old days when you just had a truss that fit many different situations. Also, it is an acquired taste, and so anyone who follows me on Twitter has probably heard me say this before, but you just take a simple turnbuckle or other structural element, and why is it that it always seems to end up as a Picasso bust? Also, on the one extreme on your left is no one gets to design with the algorithms of everything. You could design nothing, and on the other extreme with participatory design, everyone designs, and you design everything. And we're, generally speaking, that 95% is in that middle zone. So I see the future closer, this might be optimistic, to somebody designs and everyone designs. I may need a little help with this. Something opened up on the computer. Yep, is that back? Good, all right. Software of everything then. It's the next one. Again, short order, I'll just go right to the source. Autodesk, Anthony Houck, just the other day when somebody started discussing this when I wasn't in front of my phone. Everything is quite a lot of things, so that's part of it. But the other part is this. It's obvious within our industry, the AEC industry, that there's no one single application that's ever going to hold a project's truth. It's arguable that you don't want a single tool to do that for many of the reasons I think Brian and Andrew alluded to earlier. There's a general feeling with owners that you want a single source of responsibility, that you want one-stop shopping for your decisions. But at the same time, owners also want competition. They want to see a free, open market. And to the extent that, just looking at this beautiful skyline behind us, a city is not made up of a single building just extruded over like a Play-Doh machine, it evolves over time. And that segues into the final form of everything, before I start going back to convergence in a moment, and that's the idea of architecture of everything. Here's Fred Coder, who unfortunately passed away in August of this year, back when he was at Cornell, and of course, coincidentally, we're in Cornell Tech right now. And I mentioned Fred because in Collage City, written with Colin Rowe, the gentleman who was seated in that photo a moment ago, Fred was very much against this idea of total design, this idea that any one type of architecture or one piece of architecture is going to solve everything. So what I am seeing is that while our students, by and large, more than 50-50, which is typical in a university architecture program, grad or undergrad, go on to become licensed architects, there is a lot of NCARB record burning going on these days, where you may go through the process, but because you see yourself belonging to or leading or being a startup head of a vertically integrated company, that you don't necessarily need to be the one they're thinking, as the thinking goes, to be the one to sign the documents and stamp your drawings. So we got hybrid buildings, hybrid cars, we have hybrid clients, and we have hybrid individuals now. And our tools are no longer binary in the sense that it's no longer an either-or proposition whether you approach your project, let's say with data or with intuition, but more and more we're seeing, just to pick an example at the top in blue, we're seeing the two combine or converging. So where data is informing our intuition, at the same time improving it as we go. We get better and better as designers the more we work with data. Again, not either or. And so the head and the heart are increasingly emerging, as is design and fabrication. Topics, I know firsthand as a administrator and professor that we've had to handle separately. More and more, we no longer treat them as separate things. So what are the factors that brought about this convergence in the title of this talk? I know this is too small to see, and this doesn't help very much. There are a number of things going on, just talking to you guys over the last couple of years, that's leading to the convergence of multiple tools. Just to handpick a couple or pluck a couple out of here, that the 10 are interoperability, accessibility, interdisciplinarity, the blurring of roles, connectivity, context, superintegration, impatience, simultaneity, and feedback, just bringing up impatience. And again, one of the hazards of speaking late in a conference is that things come up several times. I love this idea that Brian was talking about, where we're impatient. Generally speaking, we can take matters into our own hands instead of creating a wish list for manufacturers. Not to take anything away from the manufacturers, it's a long, slow process where you hold your breath for a year and hoping the next release that your wish list, be, come true. And we used to have tools like Form Z where there was a 100% chance that if you provided a suggestion, it showed up in the next release, like magically. Sounds like Construe is very flexible that way, where you'll just roll out that afternoon and in the morning you get some feedback. But what we're seeing more and more, of course, is you guys creating your own tools. And one of the messages of my talk today is that it's not even necessary to create your own tools so much, whether they're plugins, add-ons, or standalone pieces of software, as it is about learning how they work with each other. And I also think Construe is a great example of not waiting for industry to catch up to get your BIM models to work with other software. So the real message is only connect, from Ian Foster, and we do that with our tools more and more. And this is something that anyone who's worked on an integrated project or integrated design, Richard Rausch from 1986 on a book on integrated buildings talked about the blurring of separate entities within a building, or the different ways in which things can work together. There's different ways we can talk about it. It's not just cramming them together or having a mashup or putting them in a blender. And so working backwards, when we talk about integrated teams and collaboration, we're really talking about people with people. We talk about machine collaboration, we're talking about you and your laptop. We talk about robotics, we're talking about your laptop and machines. In automated construction, data, building materials, and robotics. And it goes on from there. What our owners are looking for always, 100% of the time, is clarity and certainty. As an architect, I'm completely comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity till about an hour before we have to stamp the documents. As structural engineers, I would suspect maybe slightly less. Our owners won't have any of it. They want to know what's going to happen, whether it's with the building skin that we designed for them, whether it's the cup of coffee, and whether when I show up to work, it will be at the temperature and be fixed up the way that I like it. Similarly, we are always working towards simplicity and instantaneous results. We don't want to hear that whatever you come up with your dream tool, whether through the hackathon tomorrow or in your own practices, is too hard to use. And so the ultimate goal, of course, with 2D on the left and 3D BIM on the right, is to try to get BIM to be as simple and as accessible as CAD is. And that's how we will really reach out to the 95%. We fool ourselves into thinking that iteration is just one more step on a linear process. It's not. Iteration, of course, is the part that makes design incredibly ambiguous and very hard to pin down. And no matter how you talk about the iteration, it's not hopefully cyclical completely. Hopefully it's more of a spiral, and you as the architect or engineer are working towards decisions. And so let's not fool ourselves into thinking that our linear processes are anything more than that, because we do have access to sensors, to the cloud, and other means to get immediate feedback. So we no longer have to show up at the trailer on Fridays and drop our models into Celibri or Navisworks and get 900 clashes when that can happen in real time. At the same time, it's very important to know with AI and machine learning that we're able to anticipate what can happen in the future. Only semi-facetiously saying that you can ask the future what's going to happen in post-occupancy evaluation and how can it inform the design process before you even start a design process. And if you think that that's something that's too far in the future, and I don't think anyone in this room really does, we have that technology already, we just haven't borrowed it and applied it, and I challenge you to do so. So buildings as buildings, buildings as documents, and buildings as database are the three approaches I take when I teach classes. Buildings is teaching design studio or history. Buildings as documents is professional practice, or some of the more technical classes I teach in architectural technology and building science. And buildings as databases is the overlay over everything. Everything's a database. And the one downside to when we talk about putting us sitting around the campfire data is the fact that it's us with a label of our role, whether you're the fabricator, whether you're the contractor, the engineer, the architect. My feeling is it creates silos that are unnecessary, and I think the reality is much closer to this, where you actually have the different tools that are around the data at the middle, and you can interchange different tools, recognizing several from those who are here. This is probably not accurate in the sense that construed should probably be in the center, and so on. But too often, this is the reality. This is what we're dealing with. And then you think this is terrible until you see actually what the alternative is, because I'm out there, and this is actually much closer to this. So to the extent that we can see ourselves as digital middle men and middle women, or data middle people and information intermediaries, and think about passing the data from one end to the other, the more beneficial our work will be. This is like fireworks. I'm not going to dwell on this, but what I'd like to do here is look at some specific tools very quickly. We are not at the singularity quite yet. We're staged right before that, the Venn. So instead of the age of M for emulated or emulators, I'm going to say that we're still very close to the singularity, but I call this the age of Venn. And I spoke last month in Italy, and I was there last year as well, and when I'm there, I try to see my favorite architect's work, Carlo Scarpa, So the Olivetti showroom in Venice, and he's born in Venice, by the way. And he's also buried very close to the Brion Cemetery. At the Brion, he created this Venn diagram, which, like the mirror, reflects, also at the same time, it enlightens, like the lamp. It also serves the Venn diagram for me, looking at the tools you guys come up with and work with every day. It's very much like looking through lenses. So you just start with something as simple as that, design and manufacturing, and Brian Ringley's work at Pratt God is probably a great place to start. Very quickly, BIM and computation, thinking about the two being parallel to the point where we're not even going to say the word dynamo anymore because, of course, it comes with BIM. And then you look, again, very quickly at Hangzhou MBBJ project with our friend Nate Miller and some of his more recent work with Proving Ground. Gaming and spatial analysis overlapping in the Venn with VR. And as Anna talked about, there's great progress made in that front. But again, talking about the 95% and the 99% that haven't yet taken this on, some of the medium-sized and smaller firms, it is things like, while this is augmented reality, it's gaming that has really popularized it, as it is the New York Times giving to their subscribers cardboard. It's working over the internet with tools in a secure way that also makes it very possible. BIM and virtuality, all I could say is we're Visto, and some of these other tools are now coming prepackaged with our BIM. Again, it's not going to be something that we're going to be even having to think about or talk about. BIM and Internet of Things, there's too many examples to discuss. LMN's studies for their projects. A lot of towers going up in these developments where Internet of Things is one of the very first things we look at and think about, and Watson is coming to a headset near you. Design optimization and fabrication through my own colleagues, and going back to Nate Miller. I love how you can go through this and not only pick out which one is the most optimal scheme, but which one also looks the best and feels best, and go straight to documentation from the Grasshopper tools. Computational tools, the cloud collaborative work processes, our models intuitively are turning green when we're working within the constraints and red when they're not. I was on the High Line yesterday looking at this project. In LMN, all I could say is you put all your constraints in and all your client's goals and your goals, and actually it's not that the design is able to work with all of those goals and constraints, is that those goals and constraints become the design, and always in their hands, very attractive. Design structural engineering through former work with HNTB, also, of course, Thornton Tomasetti. What is designed, what is constructed. Philip Beasley out of Toronto, neuroscience and gaming. I could talk for a half hour just on that subject. Geodesign with Manny Gopal-Fard on our campus. Project management. Project managers love the fact, as you saw a little bit earlier today, that we're able to go directly to visualizations instead of having to farm it out into Photoshop. You're noticing that the Venn diagrams went from 2 to 3 and now to 4. They're becoming a little more complex. Again, back to Manny Gopal-Fard, professor of computer science and civil engineering on my campus at the University of Illinois, able to impact scheduling, just looking at the equipment and the people that are walking through the site, but not actually looking at them, just taking random video and able to, through semantics, be able to work with them. And of course, Woods Baggett's Samri, wonderful South Australian project, which deserves much more time than we have for here. Here I'd like to dwell just for a minute on this 5-starred or 5, like Rubens' 5-sided image. It's the Partisans Partners out of Toronto. Pay particular attention to Alex Josephson, the gentleman on your left. Here they are, is the firm all together. That's Alex right there, and here he is on a weekend working in his lab. Here he is trying to levitate a cup of coffee, which is every bit as important as making sure your coffee is set the way that you like it. And they work at all scales. So the smaller scale of trying to get wood to replicate softer material, and lighting through the bent plex, and also event spaces, smaller ones like this in an existing Union Station. And then this one should be of interest. to some of you, Mecca, designing event spaces the size of cities. So they are taking over. That's the firm that ate Toronto. Here you have Bar Revell with the toolpath. If they don't have the toolpath, if they don't have the tool, if they don't have the robots, they will create the robot, which is pretty fascinating. They're fearless. They'll get permits for everything. And here you've got the grotto sauna. Many of you have seen this before. But again, all through robotics. And it's also very, not only sustainable, but also fits in very well with its environment. And so you have the end of the fireworks right here. And it ends up in an ecology. It ends up in an environment of that you could only call combinatory creativity, which is what all of you do every single day. And so I'm here to tell you that what we're living through right now is not like an AI winter, a software winter. It's actually one of the most creative times I've ever seen in the last 500 years in architectural, engineering, construction history. If you think about the Renaissance very quickly, it was a time of transition between the medieval ages and the modern age. It was a bridge. You saw the quote a little bit earlier, a bridge that takes us from one time to another. We're arriving at that time through the Renaissance. But what we have also is multitasking. So I'm here to say that when you mix these tools, I think you guys know this, you become more of a mixologist than you do a multitasker. And so we don't really have this linear process of becoming something in the tech world. Our reality day in, day out, whether you're a BIM manager or anything else, is a different kind of reality. You're also a mixologist as a firm leader because you're hand selecting who's going to be on what role. You also decide that you may be wearing 16 different hats. You may decide what 4 hats you're going to play at any one time. And so my current focus in research is on the super user. It's on you folk. And I'm not paying a lot of attention to the resume on the left, but in terms of talent, my students, they're represented like this. It's the ones that know that different tools can do different things, and that it's stupid to get one tool to do everything. It's like trying to say happy birthday on LinkedIn or get a robotic arm to blow out your birthday candle. So it's someone who has the wherewithal to recognize a tool, the curiosity to inquire, the confidence to mess, the capacity to learn, and most important of all, the instinct to combine the tools. So wrapping up, it's going back to that student, and that student is multi-talented and multidisciplinary, and that actually enables him or her to work with others. So again, it's not multitasking, it's more like Yertle the Turtle, where you're building one thing on top of another. And that's my current research, the book that just started this month. I've got a year to write it, and invite you to talk to me at any time. One of the models, very quickly, and I'll wrap up with this, that I use for some of you, like Mustafa, what I'm about to show you would take 7 hours, and for others, 7 years, like myself. But we all start here, and we miss these inflection points with these successive sigmoid curves. And when we train or learn something new, that's, we fail. But when we pay attention to the inflection points, especially the first one, the most important one, we're able then to jump on to the next thing. You don't give up what came before. So this is the one, the crossroads to pay attention to. This one's still okay, but chances are it's a little late and you're not really being efficient. This is my career. Every 7 years to the day, I've changed what I do without giving up what came before. So it's really all about crossroads. So my challenge for you is not necessarily to focus exclusively on making sure the coffee that's waiting for you at the office is made the way at the right temperature that you're waiting for. It's to actually go for the moonshots. You have all of the talent and ability right here in this room to solve the intractable, wicked problems that we have in our industry that go well beyond some of the minutiae that we have to deal with every day or when we just feel like we can't aim that high. Go for the huge problems, look at the breakthrough technologies, and come up with the radical solutions. Because who's positioned to benefit the most from the convergence aren't the owners, it's you. So we don't necessarily know where all this is headed, and that's okay, because we know what we want to experience. It's come up several times today. It's the magic, and it's the joy. Thank you.